Welcome to the Shared Path. I'm Maggie Linton. We'll travel to the world of fantasy with award winning fantasy and fiction author Alaya Dawn Johnson. Returning to her love of writing for young adults, Alaya shares her latest adventure with the Library of Broken Worlds. Welcome, Alaya.
Hi, Maggie. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm excited to be here with you too. And I want to start out talking about you first, even before we get into this story, because I think your adventures of growing up and discovering who you are really lent to the Library of Broken Worlds. Talk about your beginnings and when you knew you needed to write.
Okay. I actually have wanted to write novels basically since I knew what a novel was. I was lucky to kind of know my calling from a young age. It didn't mean it was easy necessarily, but I definitely had this vision of wanting to be able to write in different worlds and create different worlds. And I think a lot of that came from I grew up in DC, well, outside of DC in Maryland, but my family is like third generation DC, and I definitely had a lot of experiences of being in different worlds, these worlds of my church group in DC that was very black and very diverse and very interesting. And then, this series of kind of strange white private schools and how and the just navigating between my parents and the different generations and all of that was kind of always made me feel as though I was swimming in between different worlds, and I wanted to be able to create something of my own. And so I think that was kind of my first draw to science fiction and fantasy, and I've really continued to do that for the rest of my life, and I love it because there's always something new to explore. So that's kind of how I started, and then I just always ended up looking for new worlds and even new languages. So I've just had a life that was I've been lucky enough to fill with so many different perspectives. And I think that's just so wonderful for literature, and it makes me so excited to write for young people. Also, just because I wanted to be able to show them the world as big as I realized it was.
Living in another country in Okinawa for a while too, I'm sure helped open your eyes to many different things because they use so much symbolism and ancient um, ties to their world that help it exist too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've been living actually in Mexico
Yeah.
for the last almost 10 years, 9 years now. And I moved to Oaxaca, Mexico about 2.5 years ago now. And it's just incredible. I mean, there's different languages, and I don't just mean Spanish, I mean indigenous languages and ways of thinking, ways of dressing, ways of eating, I mean, just everything can change depending on where you are, and I love that. I love being able to be privileged enough to experience or at least begin to see the world from a different perspective.
Well, you share a different perspective for sure with the Library of Broken Worlds. Where did this idea come from? And this was not written in 6 months or a year, was it? This was a
No.
long haul
Oh,
book.
actually, I actually started it in Oaxaca. So set but 7 years ago. So it's been a while. Goodness, at this point, we might be getting on 8 years. So it was, yeah, it was one of those processes. I started with a draft. I knew what the idea, the core idea. I knew it was about a young woman, many thousands of years in the future, in a society that really valorizes peace, and she's from a library that is the foundation of peace in her planet, but it turns out that there's things about her world that she doesn't know and that she's implicated in. And the more she discovers, the kind of more her world expands and the more it starts to crack. And so, the original idea I had, I mean, the image was of this young woman who's been created by what they call gods, but they're really kind of advanced artificial intelligences. I mean, she's literally was birthed by them, and she has to leave the place where she was born, and she's crossing a desert. And I had this vision of this young woman crossing a desert, knowing that she was leaving everything she's ever known and was possibly facing death and like her determination to do so. And so that was the original idea, just this place called a library in this desert and these gods, and so and then the rest of it just kind of kept developing. I rewrote it at least twice, and I mean rewrote like just the whole thing. I might have kept 20% of it, I mean, and it was a lot of work, but it was really worth it for me to be able to fulfill my vision of the story, because I wanted to be able to write something that really expanded the imaginative space that people think is possible, or what people think is possible in our future. And I wanted it to include many different perspectives and many different people. I didn't want it to just be one person's future, which you so often see in science fiction these days.
But the one thing that kind of still went through is, and it was Frida was the lead. Um, she was constant. She kept running into people who also needed her help to understand what freedom and peace was about,
Yes.
and feeling the need to help them. Let's talk about her need to fulfill that destiny in a sense.
Yeah. So Freda she's born in the library. She's literally the gods build these tunnels under the earth. It's kind of like their arteries, that's kind of how they refer to them. So she's almost walking through the bodies of the gods. And through that experience, she's learned so many different things. She knows many different things than most people in her world know, not just facts, but also intuitively. And she meets Joshua and Nergui, who are two very different people. She meets them at different times in her life, but they're both people who are, in their own ways, victims of the system that has allowed her to live with so much peace. And I really try to interrogate what peace means, because as we all know, there's different kinds of what people think of as peace. So like Dr. King was talking about peace as the absence of conflict, or peace as the presence of justice, and that was the kind of concept that I was really trying to focus on, because a lot of times, especially when you live in empire, even if you are someone who is marginalized in that empire, you're still distant from the conflicts that your lifestyle engenders, and so I wanted, that was one thing that leaving the United States, living abroad, was something that was brought very, very much home to me. And I wanted to be able to show that experience through Freda's eyes, even though it's a very different context and it's far in the future and there are gods and artificial intelligences and everything about like that.
Yeah.
I love that aspect of science fiction and fantasy, that I can take a circumstance out of context and put it in a different context so that it can be actually explored in a more robust way or in a different way, so that people can get a different perspective on it. So that's definitely like the role of Joshua Nergui in the story, to be able to expand Freda's world in a way that shows her the truth of it.
Uh, she also had, I'll tell you some of the names you had in here and go, am I going to be pronouncing them right? That kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, listen, don't worry about it. I got this is like a classic issue of fantasy and science fiction.
Yeah. But I also liked the fact that you called it a library. And I
Yeah.
think about, if anybody goes to a really big library and through the tombs and down the aisles and things like that, and that's what I kept picturing, except
Oh
yours
yeah.
was going down and like you said, spreading out. But I thought the use of the word library also was the need for discovery at the
Yes.
same time, and opening her senses to what needed to be done and how she could really help get things done.
Yeah, well, I think to me, libraries, and for a lot of us, libraries were a sanctuary for me growing up. I mean, and this physical space, and that was important to me, to like to describe a library, even though it's far in the future, that has a physical space, that occupies a place where you can go and you can be yourself and be safe there. And also, but also, as you say, the resources, as just a place where it's so much of human knowledge is collected. And I think that clearly. clearly people know how deeply important libraries are for expanding consciousness, for expanding our perspective, for understanding what's possible because they're under attack, you know? And I think that I mean, I certainly I was in 2014 when I started this, I was not thinking that, you know, 2015 somewhere then there I wasn't thinking about current politics, obviously. I was thinking about how much I love libraries, but you know, that's the other side of it, right? Like when you collect knowledge, when you give people that access, when people are able to go into the past and see, oh wait, history isn't really exactly what they have told us history is, that there are other stories underneath the dominant story, you know, that there are other truths that are in fact much more robust beneath the thing that they've told us is the truth. You know, that destabilizes a lot of a lot of narratives of people in power, and I think that's what makes them so powerful. That's why I knew that no matter how different it looked, what Freda's world was a library because it was a repository of knowledge. It was a place that promoted peace. And you know, I question that all over. I am a writer incapable of writing like a an authority that is benign entirely, but I still, and Freda always still believes in the ideals of where she's from. And I think that's important because even if it's been corrupted, a library that's been corrupted is still a library. It's a library that's collecting knowledge and is helping humanity reach hopefully a different space.
There will always be people who are seeking that knowledge, and you have bunch of them
Yes.
and bring them to life. I'm gonna, and you also, you know, you talk about AI, but you also have some avatars running around in here,
Yes,
and a
yes.
lot. I think people can relate to avatars even a little bit more than they can AI. It's kind of the new thing on the scene. But when you started saying avatars, I'm going, oh yeah, okay, I got that, and that was
Right.
part of it too.
Right, right. No, and I think a lot of it too is, you know, I again, you start a novel at one time, you know, with one conversation happening, and then it comes out in the middle of a totally different conversation. So like ChatGPT did not exist when I started this, you know. So
Mhm.
it's a kind of interesting just to see like how these different ideas end up playing out. But yeah, like a lot of what I wanted to do is we have different gods, but they have different personalities. You know, like a human has different aspects of themselves, and I wanted to be able to play with that. Like the gods have, you know, their avatars have different genders, they have different expressions, they know different things. You know, so I like that too. The idea of a consciousness, however it came about, being large enough to encompass all of the kind of diversity that can be contained within one consciousness. I mean, you know, and that mirrors that of people, you know. And so I was playing around with that. Also, just because I was, you know, bringing it back a little to Oaxaca in Mexico, I'd been studying Mesoamerican religion and traditional religious systems, and there was just so much of that where you have a god, oh, but he has this aspect, you know, or this avatar, and he has this aspect, and this aspect is actually a woman, you know, and this aspect is you know, agender or whatever. And so we had, so I just realized that, and it's a kind of these concepts they call like fission and fusion, so the gods come together and then they come apart, and I got really into that, and I think it really ended up infusing a lot of the kind of god system, the avatars, and the library of broken worlds, because it made a lot of intuitive sense to me, as divinity, the idea of having all of these different aspects that can also combine.
All right, let's go for some of these names.
Okay.
Emigia, is that right?
Maya.
That's Amaya?
It's
Oh,
Maya.
okay.
Yeah.
Who's also Namarin, Naji?
Namarin. Yeah, there you
Yeah,
go.
okay, I got Namarin right. And
Yeah.
like you were talking about the blending and how they change, and one known as one for some by one
Hmm.
person, it's almost like, and by the way, my name is also this, and that role
Hmm.
that was
The
played.
For Liz,
Yeah, for Freda,
um, Freda,
how they,
right.
yeah, how they combined.
Right,
You
exactly.
know, the need to control, but yet let it fly at the same time.
Uh-huh. Right. Well, the gods exist on a very different time scale. Again,
Hmm.
their origins might be artificial, but at this point they have grown into something kind of unprecedented in the universe. So humans aren't necessarily always interacting with them, or if they are, they interact with one part of them and then the other part has a different opinion. And I played with that a lot. So the Namarin is the great war god. He's the first material god in that universe, and though they have supposedly grown beyond war, it turns out that that's not quite true, or that they've been more, instead of going beyond war, it's more that they have suppressed war, and they end up suppressing war with a special contained war, a war that they think doesn't count, except it counts for the people who are forced to fight it and the people who are forced to die in it. And they say, well, this is better than letting billions of people die. We just let a couple thousand people die, but it affects that community, it affects that
Yeah,
world.
exactly.
So that's the Namarin. And Yamaya is yeah, that's so funny, right? I mean, like the way I spell things a little differently, like
Oh
getting
yeah.
it, but of course, then you might not recognize. Yes, I very much am basing her on traditional African deity of the water, but in a different way. And she's who Freda calls her mother. And she's the god that Freda most learns from and interacts with over the course of the novel, because that's the one who paid enough attention to her as a child to allow Freda's parent, her human parent, to discover her. Because when she was a baby, she was just sort of appeared one day in the tunnels, and if no one had found her, she would have died there. So that's kind of how she ended up being Yamaja's daughter in particular, and learns to commune with her and learns to experience the world as a small consciousness, kind of integrating herself every once in a while with a much larger consciousness.
One thing that I also found so interesting was the fact that each time someone kind of broke off and started on their own, they wound up kind of still bringing, it's kind of like living your life. You still wind up bringing everything that's happened before you with you, but on the world of discovery, you're opening a door to another theme, another life, another
Mhm.
discovery. And it doesn't always work out the way we think it's going to be. It's kind of like we have dreams, and the dreams don't always manifest the way we want them to,
Right.
but yet the manifestation that does come is something generally good. Not always
Yeah.
in this novel, but you learn from it.
You learn from it. I
Yeah.
think that's important. I mean, as someone who has immigrated, who I left the place where I was born, I went to a very different context in Mexico City, and then I went to an even more different context in rural Oaxaca. So that thing where no matter where you go, you bring yourself with you is very true. And certainly as someone who wanted in some ways to kind of have a new start and just kind of forget the past. I mean, it was eye opening to me to realize, like, oh no, I'm still here, but there's still a different perspective. And I think that experience of both being exactly who I was and am, and then discovering all sorts of different aspects of the world and different aspects of myself, has been really enlightening. And I think a lot of that, as you say, has gotten infused in the characters and their journeys, because I always knew from the beginning, like I said, that she would leave this place that she was born in, that she would leave this place that she loved, and so that was super important to me, to be able to show what it's like to both be in a place and decide to leave a place despite everything that's holding you there. And all of the characters in their own way were displaced, right? So Joshua left Tierra and his hometown in order to go to the library, in order to have the experience, to be a lawyer or a law scholar who can help his family. And Nergui is a disciple of a persecuted religious order that has fled to the library for refuge, and has does not want to be there in any way. So she's very much like clinging to where she's from for a lot of the beginning of the novel, and that's a lot of the conflict she has with Freda. before she begins to open up. And I think that that process of opening up, of feeling your heart kind of crack open and accepting these new experiences, as you say, it's not what you expected. You weren't,
Yeah.
you didn't, you had an idea, but the world has a different idea, and you can either resist it and like be in conflict with it, or you can sit back and let your heart open, as Freda would say, like a radical love. You can let yourself feel, as hard as it is, a radical love, and that will change you. And I think I ended up showing like several characters in the different ways that it can change them.
You also open them up to realizing that they're, well, I'm saying hearts, but because that's what I call it, could love,
Yeah.
could and learning to accept others. And it doesn't
Hmm.
have to be a constant conflict or need to control.
Yes. Yes, and that was, I mean, talk about a journey. I gotta say, I mean, you're really bringing out a lot of deep themes here, because this is a lot of stuff that I've been working through, and seeing like how easy it is to let this beautiful emotion of love kind of slide into emotions that are understandable, but so detrimental to love. Wanting to control, wanting to to hold on, wanting to just sort of like sit still and not allow things to move. And the more you do that, well, the more
Harder it
like the
becomes.
world's gravity is just pushing you along. The harder it
Mhm.
gets, the harder it gets. And I think that's when we can do a lot of damage to others, and it's when we can do a lot of damage to ourselves. And feeling yourself holding on isn't healthy, and feeling someone else doing that to you isn't healthy. And I definitely had it was interesting, because Freda loves two people in this novel. She falls in love with Joshua, and then she falls in love with Nergui. And it was important to me, because in young adult literature you don't often see the ways that two good people can be in a bad circumstance. You don't often see the
Yeah.
way that you can just in life kind of screw something up sometimes, or just not be in the right place to be able to appreciate it. They're
I
both
say
very
it's
good
kind of like you
people.
can't get out of your own way.
Yeah, yeah, I know. That was definitely what was going on with
Yeah.
Joshua,
Yes.
and and in some ways him too, like he wasn't able to fully see Freda where she
It
was,
was. Yes.
and
Mhm.
that really created this conflict between two people who genuinely love one another, but they're young, and Lord knows we can do that when we're much older. So it's one of those learning experiences, and I wanted to be able to show that you can lose love and you can find love. You don't have to hold on to like the one, if unfortunately it didn't work, and I wanted to have that kind of arc in, and then her meeting Nergui, and that the difference of those relationships. And in some ways, it's just the difference is she learned from one, and so she was able to show up in a better way for the second one, and yeah, I think having different relationships, having different ways that people interact with one another, like really kind of showing the complexity of human relations. I think that's something that's so beautiful. I love that in literature. And the best literature always has it. I wanted to be able to include that, especially because I'm writing young adult.
This one's young adult, but you also write for adults too.
Yeah.
And you're you want everybody to find their right fit, don't you? I should say.
Yeah, a lot
I
of
don't.
ways, yeah, absolutely. I have a lot of perspectives. Like I said, I got a lot of different avatars in here, and I want them to be able to write their stories and find their audiences.
Mhm. As you uh once again, the Library of Broken Worlds, even in the very beginning, um you kind of set up almost like a star system. You you show how things are and how they're
Mhm.
relate to each other. And where did you get the idea to do that? Because that's what captured me initially. I'm going, oh, this is going to be kind of cool. It's a
Oh.
library being not necessarily Earth, but a moon that everything kind of gets attracted to.
Yeah, so okay, so that's like my kind of library solar system
Yes,
interaction
yes.
system. So the library has four library gods, and it has tesseracts that go to the different human systems. And there's what I call human systems. So basically just like different stars with habitable planets that are far flung in the universe, that places that are, hundreds of light years, hundreds of thousands of light years away, that you would never be able to get to in a spaceship normally, but they have these kind of wormholes or portals between two different spaces. So they're actually connected. So even though, the Maham system is very far away from the Awilu system, so but they are connected, and the connections kind of run through the library so that people, it's kind of like you take a train and then you get off at Times Square and then you take another train. Like the library in that is kind of Times Square, and there's some lines that run between the different systems, but there aren't as many. And so the kind of both like metaphorically as well as quite literally in terms of the subway lines of these tesseracts, people
Yeah.
have to go through the library to get anywhere else. So the library is controlling commerce and traffic, and in that way sort of maintaining peace, because you can't do anything without the library's approval, because otherwise, you can in your own little system, but you can't communicate with others, and everybody, the whole universe has evolved to be very highly interconnected. So the library isn't Earth at all, right? I mean, it's just a totally different island. And then Earth is Tierra, where Joshua is from. And then, over here, Nerguya is over here. The Sirius Awilu are over here. Then the library is in the middle, right? And all the gods there's different gods, and there's different transport systems. So that was, I don't know, where did this idea come from? I love far future stories. I grew up with Madeleine L'Engle and Wrinkle in Time, and the idea of tesseracts like has always stayed with me. I have to say, I think I've been waiting my whole life to write a tesseract in a novel. So, I mean, some of this was just like me indulging young Alaya, like, oh yes, now you're gonna get to write your space fantasy, and then once I started it, I got all these ideas, and I actually have like a different version of that map, which is like with spoilers and stuff. I have all these ideas. I mean, you wouldn't even believe the reams of world building I have, that I haven't even touched yet. So
There's more to come, huh?
oh yes, absolutely.
Lots more. Without uh it's your way of awakening people. And I think that that's really the thing that I left with more than anything is yes, there's always going to be a conflict, but yes, there can be peace.
Yes. Yes, and I'm so glad that you said that, because I would not want anyone to finish this book thinking like that war is inevitable and everyone's always horrible to one another. I mean, I think I wanted to be honest, but I also want to be optimistic, because for me, I want, like I said, young people to be able to imagine different futures, to see things in a different enough way, to realize that the way that we've always been told that things work, that isn't how things have to work.
They can make the difference in making it work.
Exactly.
All
Exactly.
right. Well, listen, thank you for a very wonderful book. I know you got to go, but I'm going to say I wish you many, many more great books that are to come, and
Thank you so
uh,
much.
and wish you the best in everything.
Thank you so much, Maggie. This was wonderful. I
All
I
right.
just love being able to talk about worlds with someone who's so insightful.
Well, listen, thanks again to hang on a second. Thanks again to award winning Alaya Dawn Johnson. Her new fantasy novel for young adults is The Library of Broken Worlds. Lots more, including information about her and her other novels, are at her website, alayadawnjohnson.com. Once again, that's alayadawnjohnson.com. Until next time, seek peace and spread lots of love. I'm Maggie Linton.